Hi everyone, Trish Triumpho Sullivan here, and we're continuing our lecture in Art History 1B of Historical Categories, which is Lecture 2, Part 2. All right, so we'll talk a little bit more about this vocabulary that we need in order to talk about art history, okay? So, next we have iconography. Iconography and subject matter. Okay, so iconography, you guys, basically is the kind of, it literally means the writing of images, like what, if we wrote it down, what those images would mean. And an icon is basically a symbol, right? So an icon is a symbol. Right? We see icons pretty much every day. Iconography is the study of symbols. Okay, so if an icon is a symbol, iconography is a study of symbols. And the significance and of them. Currently, we have many symbols in our everyday life. We have many icons, trademarks, language, right? So our language is written with symbols. Each letter is a symbol that represents a sound, and when we put those sounds together and the letters together, it makes a word, right? So those are symbols. And they represent many things, you know, writing in our alphabet. We have symbols on our road signs. We have icons that tell us how to turn on our computer, right? What the power button means. And those are things that we recognize over time. And the subject matter in this case is directly related to iconography. It is what the work is about. So this is what the work is about, the subject matter. Okay, you know, what is it about? What's the subject matter? What's the story? Who, what, when, where, right? That's pretty much it. Pictorial art can be divided into numerous categories, you know, such as still life, landscapes, portraits, etc., etc. And we can learn a lot, basically, from the iconography and the subject alone. The symbolism that's used in the painting or in the artwork, right? And what the artwork is about. Pretty straightforward, okay? So iconography, symbols, subject matter, what it's about. So pretty straightforward on that. Okay, so next we have attribution. And I just lost, there it is. Okay, attribution. I'm going to spell it right there. It's 2 T's. There we go. So attribution means basically who is the artist. Right? So in some cases, we never know the name of the artist. You know, we're looking at ancient Egypt and stuff like that, where the artist was very important, but the individual artist was not. It was more like the collective, right? And so in some cases, we never know, and many argue that it doesn't make any difference. In the broad, you know, history of art, it is a history of art, not of artists. Yet we still want to connect with people, because basically people create art, right? And we identify the artist with what we call documentary evidence. Documentary evidence. Documentary evidence. So what does that mean? Well, basically, it's things such as signatures, right? How the artist signed his work, dates, and maybe even an artist's notebook that says, hey, I painted this painting, or I sculpted this particular sculptor, right? So that's the evidence, or what we call internal evidence. Right, so internal evidence basically is materials, style, and iconography, right? So we're learning about that. And comparison to other artworks kind of created in the same area. That's some of the internal evidence that we can use. And so this is called attribution. We're attributing an artwork to an artist, right? And a person that is trained in this, right, is called a connoisseur. Connoisseur of art. So a connoisseur basically describes someone who is highly trained with a keen eye and long experience. So a whole lot of experience in doing this. And really quickly, there's a term that we're going to be using, and it would be like a school of art. We talk about a school of art quite a bit in art history. But a school is not, it's not like our school, right? It's not like we're sitting in a class and there's a teacher teaching us or something like that. It's a term that describes the style and influence of the artists working in the same place, right? And their effect on each other and their artistic style. So basically what that's saying is, a school of art is our artists kind of working in the same general area. Maybe it's the same city, right? Maybe let's say Florence, right? In Italy. So a bunch of artists are working there and they all know each other. Just like a lot of times in our culture, the artists kind of tend to gravitate together and they know each other. So they're influencing each other in their style, and they have a certain thing going on. And when they're all kind of influencing each other in the same geographical area, that is what is known as a school of art. So it's not that they're taking classes together, but they are influencing each other. Okay, that's an important thing to think about there. And I want to just say, because I think this is really important for us, is when we're looking at attribution in art and who is the artist and how we use this documentary evidence or internal evidence, and a connoisseur is someone who is an expert in art and they can identify all these things, including a school of art, right? Most of the artists recorded throughout history are male, right? They're guys, and this has mainly been a culture affect of an often misogynistic, male-dominated Western European culture, right? Just like a lot of our, say, history books, they say that history is written by the winners, right? The people who dominate, the people who hold power, right? So if men have held power all this time, then women are not going to be talked about. They're going to talk about other men, right? So, so this has mainly been, cultural. It does not mean that women weren't creating art, okay? They were. And new evidence suggests a lot of women were creating art. It just wasn't written down. So just like when we look at our American history, it's written from a perspective of European settlers who have basically held power and taken over the country. It's not written by the indigenous people who have their own like attitude about what the history of the United States is, right? And it's a very valid history, but it's from their cultural perspective, what happened to them, and they don't hold power, right? So the European settlers are the ones that held the power over everyone, so they wrote the history books. So when we're seeing that women were creating art, they just weren't recognized in the history books. They're saying that during the Middle Ages, they found that women were illuminating manuscripts. They were creating textiles. They were printmaking. They were doing all kinds of creative pastimes. And remember, we're talking about art history that's written from a European perspective. So we need to take that into account. Other cultures not only recognized female artists, they elevated female artists. So we're talking, Chinese culture, Japanese culture, Indian culture. Women were recognized for their contributions to the art world. So I want you guys to keep that in mind as we're moving forward, that even though we're talking about men, women were there and they were creating just like men were. And so our next vocabulary is meaning, cause, and context. So let's just go over this quickly. Use this color. Meaning, cause, and context. All right. Whoops, that's not a J. Okay. So meaning, cause, and context. So meaning of an artwork, it basically takes into account all of the above. So that was when we're looking at the meaning. Let me get a different color to write with. So meaning, all of the stuff that we've already talked about, all the vocabulary, it takes into account the time, place, right, the time, place, iconography, right, style, attribution, or even the school of art, right? Right, so they're looking at all those things, plus the cause and the context. So let's talk about the cause. The cause is the artist, right? The artist creates the work of art. So that's the cause. And that used to be the main idea with art history, the attribution of an artwork to an artist, and the artist causing that artwork to be created was the most important part of the art history. Now we're a lot more concerned with context, right? We're very concerned with context. The cause is still there, right? We'll talk about that in a sec. But the context is like the relationship, it's the relationship relationships between artists, artwork, and the culture that's conditioning them. So put relationships with artists, with other artists, right? The artwork, and with culture. Okay, so it's relationships with artists, with artwork, and with the culture. Or the culture conditioning them, like what's affecting them. And artists are majorly influenced by their culture's way of seeing, perceiving, thinking, believing, knowing, speaking, doing, acting, and creating, right? So, and we're all influenced by that. I mean, we're kind of, prisoners of our culture, so to speak. And so it's a cultural collaboration that we call context. It's that cultural collaboration. Everything that's surrounding that artist is collaborating to create this context of how, why, where the art was created. And so this cultural collaboration that we call context, and great historical changes of context create great changes in style, right? So if we're looking at things like the fall of Rome, Christianity, the rise of Christianity, and then the rise of Islam, that changed painting, sculpture, and architecture dramatically, right? Science and technology transformed the Western world through the Renaissance to modern times, right? So these are major changes. However, just as we are defining how to talk about art through this art vocabulary, we must recognize that we bring our own cultural bias, our own thought patterns, and our own prejudices. And believe me, we all have prejudices, whether we know it or not. They're there. And sometimes they're so ingrained in our culture that we don't even recognize we have those biases or prejudices. So, art historians recognize this, and many feel that our reconstruction of art history, so, we're reconstructing it, we got a reconstruction. That's what we're sometimes just guessing like stuff that happened in the past. So we're reconstructing it. So many historians recognize it, and they feel that our reconstruction is distorted, right? It's distorted because it's, Eurocentric. It subordinates women, and that power was the prime motivator, right, in art. And so now they're using a method called deconstruction. Right? To analyze these concepts by kind of rereading history. And so it becomes more of a conversation with an kind of an uncertain outcome. So I think it's important to understand that as we're using these vocabularies and we're learning what they mean so that we can talk about art in a specific way, right? That we are coming to it through our own cultural bias and prejudice. And so, kind of recognizing that can help us to deconstruct so that when we do reconstruct, we're doing it a little bit more equitably. So I think that's a good way to put it. So the part 3 of this lecture is going to be on aesthetic categories and terms, and that will be concluding our vocabulary portion of the beginning of Art History 1B. See you in the next lecture.